let's take one or two more questions, and then we'll get the heck out of here.
What's going to happen to Elizabeth Warren?
I think she's going to stay happily in the White House. It's another reason not to wish the president any ill will, because we want him to have a second term with Elizabeth in the White House fixing the consumer protection.
She was basically appointed without the need for confirmation. Is that right?
She's a special assistant to the president. That doesn't require confirmation.
Crafty.
Look, I love this kind of stuff. The Republicans have been doing this for years. Part of my problem is we're not tough enough, for God's sakes.
Right. Sir?
Do you feel it was appropriate for the president to do an interim appointment of the new czar of medicine who's going to decide who gets what?
He did an appointment of the head of CMS. It was absolutely appropriate. He's the best guy for the job, and the Republicans were filibustering him. Bush made tons of interim appointments. Of course, on that, I was like you. When Bush was making them, I was complaining. Now that my guy's making them, I'm not complaining anymore. Well, look, it's the way of Washington. I think Washington is really screwed up. I think they ought to stop doing all this stuff, stop misusing the filibuster, stop making interim appointments, and have a serious grown-up conversation. But since that doesn't seem to be possible, we're going to have this nonsense go on, and both sides are going to do it.
The danger of getting rid of
defend it for either side.
You get rid of the filibuster, then you suddenly get back to a situation where they're then mad at you for using the filibuster.
I don't think you have to get rid of the filibuster in its entirety, but I think you really have to limit its use. You know, there's a lot of different ways of doing it, and none of them are perfect. But the other day I was watching a football game, and they have these challenges now where you could say they didn't have when I was growing up with football. Maybe you want to give the minority 10 filibusters a year, and you choose what you want to use them on, but after you're out of them, you don't get to use them anymore.
No timeouts left.
Because it is really ridiculous the way it is now. But you know, the filibuster is actually, I'm one of those people who's not so anxious to get rid of it entirely without thinking about what you're doing. The genius of the Constitution in America is it protects the rights of the minority. You can't just, in a parliamentary system, if you get half plus one of the parliamentarians, you just run your program over no matter what and you can do that in the House. The House is almost like a parliamentary system if you can call party discipline. But if 48% of people feel one way and 52% of the people feel the other way, it's not a good idea to just ram it right over the 48%, whether the conservatives or the liberals are on the short end of the stick. And our Constitution provides ways to stop that from happening. I don't think that's all bad. I think they knew what they were doing when they figured that out. So it is true that the filibuster has been horribly abused and ought to be dealt with. But I'm not too sure I'd want to get rid of that minority protection, because someday, well, we will be in the minority in the Senate, hopefully not too soon, and both sides use that. We clearly have to limit it because it's been grossly abused, and not just by the Republicans. What happens is one party abuses it, then the next party is worse, and then the next time the next party is even worse, and then so that's what's been going on for all this time.
One more question, and then we got to go. Well, I'm sorry, Dan. I'm just going to go over here. I apologize. Yes.
How should the Democrats approach the Bush tax cuts? David Axelrod talked about what is politically viable. Obama doesn't want the middle-class tax cuts to expire. How should they approach this?
Look, first I'm going to talk about the policy, then we'll talk about the politics. Here's the policy. We have a $14 trillion national debt. In my opinion, the biggest danger to America is not Osama bin Laden, it's our national debt. It's the deficit. It's a huge, huge problem. We got to deal with it now. So in theory, when Clinton was president, we had the best economy we had in 100 years, so why not let him expire and we could all pay the same rates we were paying when Clinton was? Okay, well, the reason I think we ought to keep the middle-class tax cuts for another couple of years is because middle-class people are really stressed, and if you let ordinary people spend money, that helps the economy. The government, the multiplier is not quite as good. So I'd rather have that money in the hands of ordinary middle-class people stimulating the economy than I would pull it out and have the government have it to pay off debt, which isn't going to stimulate the economy immediately. On the other hand, for people who make over, and look, whatever the number is, in Texas it probably is $250,000. In L.A. and New York, okay, maybe it's $400,000 a year. I don't know what it is. But there is no reason to give people who make a lot of money a tax cut, because it doesn't do anything for the economy. It does not stimulate jobs. It does not create more spending because they put it invested in things in Wall Street and the stock market, which is basically a giant gambling casino, or it's been turned into one by the banks, and they haven't learned their lesson, I might add. So I don't favor, from a policy point of view, giving tax cuts to people who make a lot of money. Now, there's a political reason that you should do it the way Obama wants. The tax cuts are popular. So the middle class, that's a good thing, even though it's a good policy. we're going to have to, in order to fix the deficit, or the huge national debt, we're going to have to do some very unpleasant things. We're going to have to limit Social Security. We're going to have to limit Medicare. We're going to have to cut defense. And we're going to have to raise taxes. And we're going to have to do all of those. Now, interestingly, 2 of those things are hated by the Democrats, and 2 of those things are hated by the Republicans. Right. So unless you do all of them, you're not going to get to a place where we can pay off this enormous debt. And we have to pay it off. So I defy you to tell me, and this is my litmus test for how seriously the Republican Party has changed as a result of the Tea Party. If they pass out of the House the Bush tax cuts, which aren't paid for, then they're not serious about the deficit. They are not. There's $700 billion of debt that's going to be caused by that tax cut.
By the extension of the
the extension of the tax cut. They're going to have to cut $700 billion worth of programs, or don't come to me and tell me you're serious about the deficit. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I mean, in some ways, I hope they do pass. You give people who make $1 million a year a tax cut, and then you go after their Social Security for people who are getting by on $25,000 a year. I'm going to run on that in 2012. We'll have a great time. How do you justify giving tax cuts to people who make $1 million a year when you have to cut Medicare and Social Security? I'm damned if I can tell you. Everybody's going to have to put something in the pot here. We're going to have unpleasant cuts that are going to hurt ordinary people, and we're going to have to raise taxes, and we're going to have to cut the military. We have to do all of them. We are in really deep trouble, and somebody needs to recognize that and stop playing politics.
And on that upbeat note, thank you all for coming. Please give Governor Dean your hand.